Hello everybody, I'm here in Washington, D.C. with Justin Vacula. How you doing, Justin?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great, wonderful. We're here at the Women in Secularism Conference, the second annual Women in Secularism Conference. And Justin is here attending, and I'm here covering the event. And I'm really happy to talk with Justin today and talk about the conference and what's going on. It's been a very eventful day, hasn't it, Justin?
It's been quite the marathon session today, through hours of panels. This is day 2 of the conference. I'm happy to be here thanks to many gracious donors contributing to make this trip possible. Some of them writers, some of them contributors to A Voice for Men. As promised through my fundraiser, I had offered interviews for people who had donated to certain thresholds, so I'm happy here to fulfill my promise to my donors.
Great, wonderful. I can ask you a little bit about your background, just for our readers, because we are a men's rights organization, while there are a lot of atheists in the men's rights movement, just for the broader movement. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. You were involved with the Pennsylvania chapter of the Secular Coalition for America, and you had a leadership position there, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and when did you step down from that position? That was last year, right?
It was a few months ago. It was in 2012.
Okay.
It's now 2013. There was a lot of discussion surrounding my appointment to leadership for this national organization in the Pennsylvania state chapter. Soon after the announcement went out, there were various bloggers who had popularized the fact that I was appointed to a leadership position. An open letter campaign / petition was started to have me fired from the position. And
was this a paid position?
This was a volunteer position with the organization. And the response from certain people throughout the atheist skeptic community was that I should be fired from the position. I should not have a position of leadership because of various perspectives that I have held and various things I have written concerning issues of gender and concerning various ideas that people in the secular community have, particularly that the community is hostile to women, that women speakers are being excluded from the discussion, and that the atheist community is not a safe place for women, that anti-harassment policies are needed for women to feel safe and welcome at conferences. After expressing many of my positions on this, saying that I don't think the atheist community is a hostile place for women, I think women are invited into the community, I think that anti-harassment policies are not a good idea, that there is no legitimate threat that women face in the community, I was very much shunned for these perspectives. And because of that, there were calls, there were blog posts, there was a whole campaign throughout the internet. And eventually I had stepped down from the position because the organization was taking a tremendous amount of flack, and I put the priorities of the movement and the organization above my own.
Okay. So like that whole thing basically panned out to where basically you left the position. Do you still have anything to do with the Secular Coalition for America at all? Do you still do any work for them? Or
no, I do not do any work on behalf of the organization.
Okay. So that's a good segue into the whole history of Atheism Plus and how this whole thing came to be where we're at today, here, right now. Of course, the atheism movement, if you can call it that, has been gaining popularity in recent years. In the past 5 years, it's grown a lot.
That's right.
And the suspicion is that this attracted the attention of co-optive-minded feminists who want to sort of kind of co-opt a message and maybe astroturf what's happening with atheism in this country. When did you, and I know that you and of course and several other people like Thunderfoot and many other notables, which and the names don't come to my mind right now, have written about this and have been very curious and outspoken as to why this is happening and have come under a lot of fire because of it. When, in your opinion, did you see this Atheism Plus start coming up, and why do you think it came up? Where do you think it sprang from? In your own words.
Sure. I think the Atheism Plus movement started, it was a call from a blogger who had said that the movement needs a new direction, that the movement needs to be focused on social justice concerns of women, and that atheists need to embrace social justice, which has been illy defined. And it seems to be a co-option of the movement in many cases. And to say that there are already atheist groups, already humanist groups that are working on certain concerns, especially humanist communities. There's an organization which has very charitable concerns, helping people throughout the world stricken by poverty, stricken by disease. there are many groups out there already doing these things. Atheism Plus seem to be, well, we're certain people in the movement, and we want the movement to address our concerns, our particular agenda. But this is not what I heard the movement to be about. This is not what I believe the movement to be about. The atheist movement is primarily concerned with issues of separation of church and state. The atheist secular movement, and we're using these terms pretty broadly because it's like herding cats, as people have said, so it's very difficult to try to put it in a box. But church-state issues seem to be a very big concern. Arguments against religion, advocacy on behalf of persons with atheistic and secular perspectives, improving the cultural view, if you will, of atheists and secular individuals. These have been many of the concerns of the movement. When I went into the movement, I was mainly focusing on church-state issues. I was mainly focusing on activism. I had worked to try to get student groups started. I was involved with many church-state issues, making news, national news, local news, everything, and writing about skeptical topics. And then all of a sudden these people come around and, oh, well, the movement needs to sway this way, and here's our group. There was a lot of divisive language. You're either with us or against us.
Right.
We need to kick out the chuds. And this rhetoric of the misogyny and sexism in the atheist community had come about, and there were very clear demarcations, very clear lines of people who were the approved type.
Right. These people, did they come out of nowhere, or were they faces you had seen around before?
Well,
or was it just sort of...
yes.
I mean, where did they come from? Who sent them? I mean, were they from somewhere else, or were they like... was it truly like a grassroots thing within the movement that these people popped up?
It's been much of the same conversation that happened as a result of Women in Secularism 1, the conference that had occurred last year, about how there are certain male speakers who harass women, who are dangerous. So people ask, well, who are these people? What is the evidence backing these concerns? And various women say, well, we can't come forward with these concerns because we don't want to name names. And the conversation goes on, well, why don't you go to the police? Well, the police won't believe us.
Right.
And it seems to be really empty in that if you are a woman or a man and you happen to be sexually harassed, or there's a problem, there's something you need to report to police, and you're just going to sit back, oh, the police won't listen to us, this doesn't seem to be the ethical thing to do. You can't just resign and say, oh, the police won't listen to us. It doesn't seem to be an effective way to approach an issue that needs to be addressed. If there's a serious problem of sexual harassment in the community and people aren't doing something about it, that isn't the way to move forward. You mentioned feminism also when leading up to one of your questions. I was under the impression that feminism is the radical notion that women are people too, movement to end sexism, and movements about gender equality. I've heard this throughout the conference, and it seems that there are many faces of feminism. And some of what I disagree with on AVFM, in that there are people who, Kathy Brennan is one of them with the RadFem 2013 conference, who have very negative opinions about individuals identifying as transsexuals, right? There are feminists who might be from the so-called first wave, who fought for the right for women to vote. There are many different perspectives. There are feminists who conflate sex work with human trafficking, human slavery. There are many different perspectives that people happen to take. So when I talk about feminism, I try to not so much view it as a monolith, and I'll talk about specific instances, sentiments I've been hearing. And at first I thought, well, these are a lot of radical voices. These are just the extremists. But over time I had seen that the so-called extremists have been a common view. The men are potential rapists. We need to stop violence against women, but don't mention men. There's a lot of these. There are a lot of these common themes. Rape culture. We've been hearing about, and when I look at a lot of these issues, I see it from a gender egalitarian perspective of men and women face issues. So let's talk about those issues and let's work together. We often hear, and we heard from the big red individual who was protesting the event in U of T, right? And she was talking about, oh, well, feminism is working on these things. It's the patriarchy and all of this, and I don't really find that to be a very helpful approach. So we talk about issues that men face, like circumcision, otherwise known as genital mutilation. Right. We talk about suicide, we talk about homelessness, we talk about many issues that men face. I find that men and women face issues, there's a lot of overlap. So let's talk about these issues as issues that humans face, rather than, I would have to say, these are women's issues. And while issues might disproportionately affect women, while issues might disproportionately affect men, well, let's talk about these issues, because this is a part of sexism. But a lot of what I've heard throughout the conference is it's limiting sexism into a box, into something that is directed toward women, when men's concerns have been brought up, or people said, well, this is something that is negative toward men and women. There were groans from the audience. What about the men's went through Twitter, and we'll talk about that later more in the interview. So it's kind of a tough topic, I think, on feminism, because I try not to view it as a monolith, but I see many common perspectives at the same time. So it's difficult to try to wrestle with and pin it down.
Sure, right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about what you want to talk about. You want to talk about labeling, and you want to talk a little bit about like the MRM and how that's kind of panning into the whole controversy of what's going on here with with atheism, and how you've been identified as a men's rights activist, so to speak, and like how other MRAs.
This is what they have said. They've also called me a mustache rights activist. So
right. Okay. Awesome.
The same acronym here, right? Okay. So I first heard about A Voice for Men when I was requested to share a blog post that I had written concerning a feminist who had filed a Digital Millennium copyright complaint against me. I had included a picture in a blog post that was amongst criticism, and I had said, well, this is fair use. This probably isn't going to be an issue, and I really didn't think anything would come of it. There are bloggers who use images all the time taken from Google, even with a link and attribution and explanation, but instead of the person contacting me and saying, hey, could you please better attribute this, hey, could you please remove this image, there was the legal mechanism that was used. The blog post was taken down, and there was a strike against my account. There was a chilling effect, as many would talk about.
Right.
So instead of actually talking about the issue, responding to the argument, instead of sending a nice email, hey, I have a problem, I try to be a very open individual, so people can do that. I'm very accessible. There was the legal complaint that was filed against me, and I reacted perhaps maybe a little bit too much on the issue, and I had drawn great attention to it. When A Voice for Men had said, would you like to share the piece, I was thinking, well, let's draw more attention. I hadn't heard of the MRM, I haven't heard of AVFM beforehand, and I said, okay, well, let's share the piece, let's draw more attention, and there were people who were quite supportive, and this became a kind of a hit piece against me in a way. People were saying, oh, well, you're identified with a hate site, and you hate women, and this and that. So there are the common things that occurred because of that I've heard, and this has been another tool to try to disqualify me from the conversation. My opinion isn't worth listening to because my article was reposted on a hate site, but there was no discussion of the content, really. Saying, well, this is what I object to. It was posted on the site, Southern Poverty Law Center called it a hate site, and that's it, although that really never was the case, and Arthur Goldwag had gone back on that.
Right, sure.
So there's that. And as far as the MRM is concerned, personally, I take a more mild approach to activism, to writing about issues, and it was Dean Esme, I believe, wrote a piece about moderation in the men's movement, about taking a more, I guess you can say, diplomatic approach, and he seems to take that. There are people like John the Other, Paul Elam, there are many divergent voices, many people throughout the network who have submitted just about 5 or 10 articles, or maybe even one. There's so many voices on the network. One thing that the network seems to embody is this idea of FTSU, that let's call this stuff out, let's ridicule it, let's attack people. Personally, I don't find this is the most effective way. I think that we can talk about the concerns and still get attention, but I recognize even in my own community, in the atheist movement and atheist activism, that people have different approaches and different style. So while other people might have different approaches, I realize that certain people can reach out to certain demographics in the way they approach things. So there's a bit of disagreement there, and it's my style of addressing issues. I tend to talk about ideas and not so much attack persons. So there's some difference between the style that's on AVFM and the style that I write on my own website and elsewhere.
Right, sure. We certainly take names at AVFM, so but I don't want to debate that.
There's a lot of that.
Right. This is an interview, so we'll talk about that over a beer or something like that. But anyway, let's talk about today. The conference today. The opening speech was by a man named Ronald Lindsay. He's the
that was the Saturday. Saturday.
I'm sorry, Saturday.
Or Friday.
Friday. That was the very first. He was the opening keynote speaker. And he is the CEO of the Center for Inquiry.
That's correct.
And he, in his speech, from what I understand, I haven't read the transcript, but in his speech, what you've told me from what I've read elsewhere, he basically criticized, or maybe not criticized, but basically pointed out that this way of silencing debate, saying that you're a man, therefore you cannot say things, is counterproductive. It's not really objective. It's dogmatic. And if there's one criticism I have about what I'm seeing, that would be it. In response, Rebecca Watson wrote an article in which she basically described him as a middle-aged white male that had no business speaking because he was a male. So
that was the sentiment that she
right, yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
Exactly. So tell me your interpretation of that whole thing, and like what your initial reaction to the speech was, and what your reaction to Miss Watson's reaction was. How do you interpret those?
Sure. I found it interesting that the conference, just by the looks of it, had all women on panels and as speakers. And as a women's conference, women in secularism too, perhaps that ought to be the case. That's what people expect. This is the expectation, and this is what the conference is for having women as speakers. And Ron Lindsay, as a male, or a person identifying as man, however you'd want to phrase it, he had the opening remarks. And I think this is interesting, considering that the organizer of the events, Melody Hensley, with the CFI DC group, who, by the way, was extremely professional. When I had met her here, she gave me a handshake, she welcomed me to the conference. She was very cordial. I thought that maybe she would have made the opening remarks, but Ron Lindsay did as the CEO of the organization.
Right.
And there's been a lot of talk in the secular, skeptic, atheist communities about how men need to come forth and talk about women's issues, about how everyone needs to talk about women's issues, about how women's issues are important, about how the movement should focus on it. And there were many persons who were leaders of organizations in the community who had authored various blog posts or written letters that were made into blog posts about how we need to speak out against sexism and misogyny in the community and everything. So this was a call a few months back for male leaders to talk about women's issues. So here comes Ron Lindsay to the conference saying, as CFI, we're very concerned about issues facing women, and so concerned that we've been working on these things, we're having this conference. He talked about this and said this is one of CFI's foremost goals. This was the majority of his talk. We get to the end of the talk, and he mentioned the idea of privilege. He said that it's a very useful social construct, but it can be misapplied. And it can be misapplied, as you said, when people try to use it to throw people out of the discussion. This is me paraphrasing him. And I would say it's often used as a hammer throughout the atheist, skeptic, secular communities as, well, you just need to check your privilege. You just don't know what women's experiences are or X experiences are because of your physical characteristic, therefore you're not welcome to this discussion. You need to shut up and listen has been much of the rhetoric, instead of listening and having a conversation.
Right. And you describe that as being dogmatic, basically.
Very dogmatic, because this community, I had thought, was supposed to be about ideas, not persons. We need to discuss ideas, and, I think it can be a useful concept, privilege, in if you explain what this privilege is, how I'm missing something, because as a white man from a lower middle class background, I haven't had the same experiences as, say, African Americans. African American men, African American women, whatever. There are all these demographics. I haven't had these experiences. So if you want to criticize what I'm saying that, oh, you're white privilege or male privilege, then explain to me what your experiences is, what your experiences are, and inform me. Tell me something. But to just say, oh, you need to check your privilege, you need to read Feminism 101, blah, 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 this isn't helpful for the discussion. It's throwing people out of the discussion because of physical characteristics, and it's not helpful. So Ron Lindsay had mentioned about this, and about how privilege can be misapplied and people can behave like Marxists and say, well, you're just with the capitalists, you're just the bourgeoisie, I can never pronounce that correctly.
Right.
He talked about this, and he said this isn't the way to go forward. And almost immediately following the talk, he mentions about dogmatic behavior, and we saw dogmatic behavior.
Right. The
white male CEO opens the conference. Ron Lindsay is mansplaining this and that. So the people, as Ron Lindsay had predicted, had disqualified him from the conversation because he's a white male and a CEO.
He responded to this. He responded to
yes.
to Rebecca Watson's article that she wrote last night.
Yeah.
What did he say? What were some of the key pieces of his article that you
Well, actually, there were 3 responses.
Okay.
The first response was a posting of his talk, which he had said that it was only intended for him to be seen. Mm-hmm. The grammar might be messy and everything, so he posted a transcript of his talk. Then there were accusations that Ron Lindsay was straw manning or straw womaning, and that people aren't actually misusing privilege or saying shut up and listen. So Ron Lindsay had posted and saying, well, here, actually, these are examples. And I think actually P.Z. Myers was one of those examples doing that. And Ron Lindsay put that out. Then there was another response on Skeptic. And Ron Lindsay responded saying things like, Rebecca Watson must live in an alternate universe.
Right. Very strong words.
Very strong words. It was a portion of his talk, and next time he has a drink with Rebecca Watson and asks for a significant portion of the drink, he'll hand her a small ice cube, and there's intellectual dishonesty on her part, as such coming from North Korea. So it's very strong language.
Coming from a pretty important guy.
Yeah, CEO
of Center for Inquiry.
That's right.
Right.
Very unexpected.
Right, yeah. I mean, of course, it's too early to tell, but would you suppose that maybe this might cause some friction between the woman who organized this conference and this guy? They work together, obviously. I mean, that's, of course, I'm asking the wrong person, but do you think this might be a decisive, or rather a divisive moment, or something that might escalate the whole controversy of Atheism Plus and people like Rebecca Watson doing the things they're doing and trying to move the entire atheism thing towards the way they want to see it? Do you think this is going to heighten tension, so to speak, and maybe kind of, how do you see that panning out? What do you think is going to happen?
In one of the forum communities I post, slimepit.com with a Y, we have this term which had originated from a blog called In Living Color, called The Witch of the Week, or Witch of the Week, in that this person is a victim of a witch hunt, and many of the self-identified feminists within the community who behave dogmatically will attack people on blogs, throw them under the bus, and use these shunning tactics, say you're not welcome in the community. And it happens to be an organized thing where many people put out these hit pieces and say really nasty things, and the commenters come in and they're really terrible toward the people, calling them every name in the book. And Ron Lindsay, I had posted, and I predict that he would be the Witch of the Week, and that is in fact happening. There are many posts, many people are really upset, very dramatic, and it's too bad that it even has to be that way, that we can't just discuss ideas and talk about it. But it's kind of the state of the community, and some certain persons who are going so far beyond the pale, suggesting that people are drummed out of the movement. This was a comment reserved for Thunderfoot. It was said by P.Z. Myers that I should be, it was disqualified from attending secular events or being involved in activism. Well, I have news for P.Z. Myers. He's not going to stop me from being active in the movement and in activism. And in fact, it's on my own accord and with other organizations that support me. So I'm very happy to continue doing what I'm doing, and I'm not going to back down to bullying that's happening.
Okay, that's a good segue into what another thing I want to talk about specifically. And I was really anxious to see how you were received here personally. You told me earlier that no one came up and threatened to kick you out or anything yet, but what's been kind of like the mood surrounding you here? Have you gotten any hostile looks? Has anybody said anything to you? Or tell me the personal reception you've got from different attendees here.
A little bit of the backstory. Before the conference, there were calls for me to be banned from the conference.
Right.
There were calls for people to send emails to the Center for Inquiry about how I shouldn't attend, how I shouldn't be allowed in the conference, how the conference is only welcome to certain attendees. There was this concerted effort, and there was a lot of focus on whether it was trying to bully me to stay home, or the name calling, the shaming tactics, whatever you might want to call it. There was a huge focus on that. There were various people who were accusing me of harassment and cyber stalking. Various conference attendees and speakers had said that if I approached them, they would file a complaint with the conference staff, and I would be ejected from the conference for merely approaching them. And that's very strange. Don't you think that it's permissible for attendees to approach the speakers and ask them questions? As many others, so some conference attendees are more equal than other. So there is what I've referred to, and others often refer to as a threat narrative, that I'm a dangerous individual, I'm violent, I can't be trusted around women was the one thing that happened to be said. And it's a lot of nonsense. This whole weekend I'm sitting in the back of a room tweeting during the conference talks and just kind of doing my own thing. So there's been a chilly climate, people giving me some stares. There was one person whom I had actually met before in real life. This person had sat in on a podcast episode I had recorded. The person seemed very cool. There were no problems. We talked about some issues, and this person was cool. And I said hi to this person, and the person responded and said, "Don't talk to me." and
Right.
that was it. But I've taken an approach as someone has suggested of not approaching people and having people instead approach me. That way there can't be any kind of allegations about me approaching people or harassing people or anything like that, so I've kind of been doing my own thing. So the reaction has been unaccepting from conference attendees and some speakers, but the staff of the Center for Inquiry have been extremely professional.
Great.
I got many handshakes, there were many good discussions, and they said, how are you feeling? Do you feel welcome at the conference? I said, well, the staff has been great, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm reporting on the conference. And because of me being at the conference and the fundraiser, which had started, many people had signed up to the conference and said, oh, well, Vacula's going, I'm going too, and let's start a fundraiser to send other people here. And I'm more than happy to have the open discussion of ideas. And I'm not protesting the conference. I'm not trying to undermine the conference. I'm here to express skepticism, as people are. And there have been a lot of ideas I've agreed with, and there have been ideas I've disagreed with. But I've been live tweeting what the panelists and speakers have been saying and engaging in the conversation. And some people have engaged in the conversation because I was here. They said, well, I saw Justin Vacula tweeting, so now I'm involved in the hashtag. Now I'm interested in what's going on. Well, great. Let's have all people in the discussion. If I were to host a conference and PZ, Rebecca, whomever wanted to come, there would be no talk of you're not allowed to come.
Right.
Come on down. Let's be exposed to ideas. I'm here at this conference that's heavily focused on feminism, and I'm sitting in a room listening to what they have to say and reporting on it. So shouldn't they want it to happen? If I'm so wrong about my positions and I need a proper understanding of feminism, shouldn't this be the place for me to be? You would think that they would want to send me here to listen to what they have to say.
You said that someone mentioned men's issues during the...
That's correct.
Right. What was that? Why do you think they did that? Do you think they only did that because maybe you were here and there was a buzz about you and your supposed affiliation with the MRM? And do you think that was the reason why it was mentioned? And what was the reaction to it? Why?
Oh, I can't know why they mentioned it. Although some of the panels and talks had used language of gender equality and sexism.
Right.
Well, that's interesting because when I think of things like gender equality and sexism, it's not only something that women are faced with, right? It's issues for men, women, people identifying as transgender, or however they want to identify. Whatever. You can identify how you want, but if you're going to talk about sexism, it's issues that all people face, humans face. And when it was brought up that religions, there were some things that were brought up, that religions are harmful to both men and women, that an obsessive focus on virginity is harmful to men and women.
Right.
There were these things that were mentioned throughout the conference, just small mentions. The crowd had groaned. There were tweets that went out, what about the men's?
Right.
And there was talk about violence against women, and I had tweeted, why is it that you use exclusionary language? Why don't you say violence against humans? Why don't you make it more inclusive? It's an issue everyone faces. Some people got quite upset on Twitter about that.
Right.
I had submitted questions for the question and answer session. The one I had submitted was after a speaker who was talking about mattering, about meaning, the philosophical question of what does it mean to have a meaningful life? How do people find meaning? I find these issues very interesting. And the question I had asked in Lightwood Conference is, you spoke about mattering and meaning. Can you please talk about external impositions and gender roles, about what it means to be a real woman and a real man? We hear this a lot about the real man has to be X, Y, and Z. It's not a self-defined thing, it's a cultural thing. People want you to be this. You have to be the provider, you have to be the protector, you have to be the person who sacrifices everything, you have to be the child bearer, you have to do this and that. And I think this matter is what individuals want to decide for their own lives. So I'd asked this question, mentioned real man, real woman. You think, I hear feminism is about ending sexism, feminism is concerned with men's issues and this and that, and there was groaning. And the communications director for the Center for Inquiry had mentioned something along the lines of, it's inappropriate to laugh and jeer at questions that are asked from people in the audience. So there is this chilly reception. It's too bad.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, thanks a lot for talking with me, Justin. I really appreciate it. On behalf of our readers, I thank you. And thank you for coming down here, and thank you for speaking with me today.
All right, thank you.
And have fun at the rest of the conference.
Readers can find more about me through my website on the Skeptic Inc. network. That's INK, skepticinc.com/Justin Vacula, Vacula. You can follow me on Twitter, @Justin Vacula, and I have a radio show, Brave Hero Radio, at blogtalkradio.com/Brave Hero.
Great, and we'll be having you on our radio show soon.
All right, and I'll be happy to go on. Again, thank you to the donors who made this trip possible, and in accord with the fundraiser, persons who have contributed certain amounts are entitled to interviews, so I'm happy to chat with you and anyone else who has donated. So Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Justin.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.